Earlier this week, I picked out a bunch of different sprues I had on my desk, unintentionally creating one of the most interesting Loyalist Space Marines that I think I've made today, which all started with an Age of Sigmar shield and a Hobgoblin artifact, which vaguely reminded me of a Dreamcatcher, and then I slowly began to picture the entire idea behind this chapter. They are cursed with strange vision of artifacts and forgotten relics, often receiving them until they are driven to madness. The first step was, of course, to deface the shield. On this channel, there's only enough space for one massive face, and it ain't Sigmar. I looked around my desk to make the shield a bit more exciting when I noticed this strange mystical totem that, in all honesty, looks absolutely nothing like a Dreamcatcher. But hallucinations and a vivid imagination are the staples of kit bashing. I wanted to create a very natural transition from the shield to the arm, and I had the absolute perfect piece. It is an Assault Intercessor arm that used to hold a chainsword that removed the top and the bottom section. To my surprise, not only did not require any modifications, but it appeared as if it was literally meant for it. Truly a fairy tale moment for this arm, so I permanently fused them. Now, in the excitement of just how well the two pieces matched, I entirely forgot to dry fit the arm. The pose was a little bit more open than I wanted to be, as shields are usually held a little bit closer. So unfortunately, I had to remove the shield and scrape away a section of the arm to try to make it a bit closer to the body, which definitely looked a lot better. Now, even though the shield is a little bit small, it's not the size that matters, and if you angle it properly, it actually blocks all of the vital parts. Now, there's something interesting about the Space Marine weapons. They all have a bayonet lug on them, but I've never really seen a Space Marine Primaris with a bayonet on it, but it is something that I can see in Horus Heresy, which got me thinking that this would be a really cool idea to implement in the Space Marine. Technically, attaching it much closer to the front would be the correct way to do it, but the connection would not be strong enough, and I think visually it just looked a little bit better if it was a lot further in. Just like there are swords and chain swords, there's also a chain bayonet. And while both of them did look absolutely phenomenal, the underbarrel chainsword reminded me of Gears of War, so I thought I'd go with that. And as the bolter pistol is my primary weapon, I needed to fix my ammo problem. Now, drum magazines for pistols do exist, and there's really no explanation why they wouldn't be in 40k. So I went ahead and ejected the 10-round magazine and attached this 50-rounder, activating the stratagem of spray and pray, because the Emperor will guide them. And beside the tactical advantage, it also just looked really cool. Now, to visually showcase that the shield is providing a lot of protection, but not providing it everywhere, I created some battle damage specifically in the areas that are not protected by the shield, visually telling the story that the Space Marine always faces his enemies head-on. Now, Dreamcatchers in their mythology technically capture dreams, good and bad. What if this chapter had an access to a very powerful Omni-Scrambler from the Dark Age of technology? In fact, it's so powerful that it scrambles even their own communication. Now, I did find an absolutely perfect piece that would have represented this very powerful Omni-Scrambler, but as I'm making a captain that is the shield of this tactical group, it didn't really make much sense for him to have such a very vital piece of communication in the front line, essentially taking a lot of unnecessary hits. So I thought I'd save it for a different member and instead give him something a lot more interesting. Space Marine Captain is meant to have an iron halo that essentially gives him extra protection in battle. Instead of an iron halo designed to absorb a lot of damage, I gave him this very powerful Auspex, allowing him to process battle information 1,000 times faster than a human brain, giving the Space Marine Captain the ability to essentially dodge projectiles and to position himself perfectly to never take a lethal hit. Now, as it is technically impossible to dodge every single hit, especially when there's a massive volley, the Space Marine is able to utilize his armor and his shield to know which position to take so that the hits aren't fatal but just do a little bit of damage. This also gave a little bit of an explanation of why the Space Marine has such a powerful device, but at the same time, his armor has quite a few different holes on it. While the connection to the power pack was never going to be perfect, I used a little bit of sprue goo just to make it as close as I could get. Now, this Dreamcatcher was already looking absolutely phenomenal, but I did need to think of the head I was going to go with. Now, on its own, I think the Black Templar helmet is just better in every single way. However, in the context of the rest of the battle gear, I decided to go with the Incursor one. Now, previously I thought these jousting shields were an absolutely ridiculous addition to a Space Marine, until I noticed the enormous gap that was left in the armpit section where a lucky bolt around would have taken the Space Marine out of commission. So to commemorate my new appreciation for these jousting shields, I added on some additional battle damage to showcase that it has literally been a life-saving piece of equipment for this captain. By this point, I was so enthralled at the idea of just creating the Space Marine that operates behind enemy lines on these very long expeditions that I thought we needed to give him a proper melee weapon. A bayonet is very powerful and very useful, but What if he needs to go against a massive wave of Tyranids? We need something else. I decided to give him a massive chainsword mounted on his back, as when you run out of bolter rounds, that is your last line of defense. I do think it'll be a little bit challenging reaching it all the way back there, but I've seen countless Space Marines mount shields and similar things in their power pack, so I do think it works. Now, I also thought about giving him a cloak, and I will leave this option available for the future, as I just left a perfect amount of gap to easily attach it. I also slapped on a purity seal on the bolter to appease the machine spirit. With this chapter operating essentially on very small expeditions in the search of these relics, it makes a lot of sense to have a mobile base that is somehow able to transport a lot of the equipment that these Space Marines need. Even though they are self-sufficient, there's still ammunition, there's still tons of other things that they're going to require. I really want to think of some different versions of this essentially expedition vehicle. That's definitely something I'm really excited for the future. But for now, I got to the painting process. I mixed a deep midnight color by mixing in the royal blue and the deep red. For the initial base coat, I ended up providing a very nice even layer, but then I moved on to applying it a bit thicker from the top. And finally moving on to the royal blue on its own. When applying this midtone, I tried increasing the angle of the airbrush. With this, I was able to make a very interesting transition of the two colors. Now, I thought the result was turning out really great, but I wanted to go back in with a wash to create a lot more of the shading. But as that would darken a lot of the colors I had generated so far, I decided to apply a little bit of the turquoise and create some brighter highlights. This way, hopefully, when I'm applying my wash, it'll desaturate the colors, but make them also dark enough that it'll match closer to the original color. When approaching a new color scheme, I always do this step of picking out some of the details in black to make it a lot easier to separate them visually. For the shield, I went with a dark deep sea blue color in order to invoke a sense of mystical powers, and to additionally resemble the Necron Blackstone. Despite its name, it's often painted in a very dark sea blue to a green color. I thought a green highlight would be a little bit too distracting, so I did go with a slightly more bluish hue, and a nice earthy color to balance out the cold hues. For the trims of the armor and the metallic areas, I went with a nice gunmetal gray, using the exact same metallic to accentuate some of the battle damage. Now for the weapon, I got inspired a little bit by the Black Templars, so I painted his weapon in a red color. I ended up adding a bit of green to the auspex to balance out the red. Now it's time for the most nerve-wracking part of the process, which is to apply the wash. As I avoided any panel lining, I was going to rely on the wash to do most of the heavy lifting, so I had to make my wash a little bit thicker so that it'd be less transparent. In order to avoid any of the unpleasant staining effect the wash might create, I had to make sure to spread the wash around very fast. Once the wash was dry, I went ahead and came back with some of the previous highlights that I mixed together by using the royal blue and the turquoise, with the primary focus of just accentuating the panels. Then to provide some additional texture in his armor, I also created these tiny little micro scratches, reinforcing the big battle damage on him and helping to create the idea of a battle-weathered look. Then for the cherry on top, I ended up giving him the cape after all. The only problem now is people are gonna tell me I made an Ultramarine. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this, like the video if you did, but for now, let's see the final result.
Je vais te nommer